This is going to be about making the fronts for the cabinets. So all of the fronts for the doors and the drawers. Now we used bamboo plywood, which we got at a place called Bamboo Revolution. There had been a little bit of a hang-up because of the labor disputes at the port here. So we ended up waiting an extra 2 months for our sheets of plywood. But it ended up not really mattering because I didn't really need it that quickly anyways. So it was sort of nice having it stored somewhere else on some boat off in the ocean somewhere. And it ended up sitting in my shop for a month or so before I needed it. Now there was some modifications to do to the cabinets. So our pulls are like this, and they sit on the top of the drawer and the door, and they kind of sneak around from the back, so they'll sort of sit at the top. But what I've realized is the one that's right at the top, the back of the pull is going to hit the frame here, and it's going to not let the drawer front go all the way back. Down below it's fine because there's a space for it, but here it's going to hit this because it's going to be about right there. So what I need to do is cut out a little space for the back of the pull into this. So that's what I need to do. So what I needed to make was a jig for the router, and it would be a jig that I could attach to the cabinetry and then route the little space for the pull into the top frame. So what I thought it could be is a flat piece, and then in that piece it'd be a hole for the router bit to track around. Normally I would just use glue for this, but the countertops are coming tomorrow and I really have to get this done before the countertops come in. So I'll use screws. So I built up a flat plate out of pieces. I sanded it all flat so the router wouldn't catch on anything. One jig. So I've got this, the little table that it sits on, a little bit lower. So I'm hoping that lets the bit come up and I won't get so much of the radius of the bit in the cut. Now the little piece on the back I can use to clamp the jig to the cabinet frame. And then I can just run the router within the hole in the jig, and this will cut out the little bit of extra frame for the pull to fit within. So I could just go around and do the different spots where I knew there would be a pull. I needed to get this done before the counter went in because I wouldn't be able to clamp my jig to the frame once the counter was in place. And I certainly wouldn't be able to get the router this close to the frame either. Now my hole wasn't quite tall enough, I think, so I ended up with a little bit of a radius from the router bit, but that was easy to clean up with a chisel. I moved the plywood to the floor just to let it sit flat for a few weeks before I started using it. I'd been kind of finding other things to do for several weeks on the kitchen before I made the first cut into this plywood. It's hard to make that first cut, but once I did that, it went fairly smoothly. So I cut the piece lengthwise to get the height of the pieces I would need, because the drawer fronts and the doors would all be the same height as they go around the kitchen. And I then cut them to a rough width with my big sled. So I've cut the panels for the drawer fronts, and I've cut them to width, and the height is approximate, although it fits the space. So the width is now exact. So now I can cut the drawers or the drawer faces out of each one of these panels. So I'm sort of doing it one step at a time here. Now the height, that'll stay. The heights of these isn't so important because the break can happen somewhere between each drawer. But I think what I'll do is I'll have it fairly close to the bottom. So the top of the drawer below will be fairly close to the bottom of the drawer above. That way things in the drawer below won't catch on the bottom of the drawer front. that makes sense.
So I can cut the different drawer heights, which goes smoothly, but what's time consuming is checking and rechecking and getting it right. But it was fine in the end. I wanted to put the panel on the end of the cabinet first. I used screws to hold this on from the inside of the cabinet. And I wanted it to come up and be flush with the face. So you can see I've got a little block of wood clamped to the drawer. That's so I have something to push the piece of bamboo against and make it flush with the face. So the drawer face will close against it.
So these pulls just kind of slip over the top of the drawer, and you just pull it from there. And I would guess they're just meant to just sit on the top and be screwed into the back. There's sort of a back plate with some screw holes. But what I want to do is cut a little spot for this to sit so that the top is flush with the top of the drawer. So that's what I'm going to try and do.
I had made this same cut up on the cabinets that are in the kitchen with a portable jig. But I thought for the door and drawer fronts, I'd use the panorouter to make this same slot for the pull. And I had thought about doing it with the dado blade on the table saw, but I thought I would get a lot of chip out doing it that way. So I thought I would do it with the router on the panorouter. What I needed to do was to make a stop or a set of stops that would hold the top of the drawer in a specific place so that I could keep the router set up to a specific depth. So I made 2 stops that would attach to the front of the table on the panorouter. And I would put them the width apart that I needed for the pull. They would hold the drawer front in the right position to get the right depth of cut. Drilled some holes, and I could then attach those to the table. I ran a test, and what I found is the stop would move when the router would hit it because it's attached at a single point. So I made a sort of scrap wood table to sit on top of the table. That would let me attach the stops to that piece of wood, which would give a second point of connection. So the stop wouldn't rotate when I hit it with the router. Now I marked on the first set of drawers, I marked the pulls in the center because I figured that's where they would go. And the cut went just fine and the pulls sat in the little slot nicely. What I needed to do was to mark where the pulls would go based on where I'd cut those slots up on the cabinetry in the kitchen. Because the first set of drawers, it didn't line up. I also found, because of the way the pulls are made, there's a little bit of a radius on the pull on the inside. So I had to take off a little bit of material on the corner of my cut where the radius of the pull could fit. Once I did that, it fit nicely. So I can put the pulls on, and I'd put it in place and mark the hole and make a little starter hole right in the center. And then I could drill a little hole with a screw and then just attach them. And they went on really easily. Then I could start putting the first set of drawers in place. Now for the bottom 2 drawers, it was fairly easy. I could put the drawer face in place and then clamp it to the drawer. Then just use screws from the inside of the drawer to attach the face. And that worked really well for the first 2 drawers. And then the top drawer, I was thinking and wondering how I was going to get to the screws on the top drawer because it's inside and the countertop is in place at this point. I was looking at it and I was wondering how to do it. I was thinking about hot gluing the drawer face to the drawer, and then I could pull it out once it was sort of loosely attached. And then my wife, the genius that she is, pointed out that I could just pull the upper and lower drawer out and use the shims and get it in the right place and then attach it in that position. And it was sort of, it's like, oh yeah, that would work. So for the top drawer, I positioned it with the drawer just below it and the top drawer out just a little bit. And what I found after a couple of these is I had to shim the upper face a little bit higher than I wanted it when it was closed, because the drawer slides of the lower drawer sag just a tiny bit just because of gravity, and it opens up that gap or that reveal just a little bit. Once I had that figured out, it worked really well. Then it's time to do the corner door. I've made a corner door for the kitchen as a prototype so I can see how the hinges work and how they attach and how big to make the pieces of wood. I had this up in the kitchen. It didn't quite fit. This section here is just a hair too long, but at least I know that now. So this will go in the corner. So it'll hinge this way, and then this can fold out of the way. So with this now, I can make the piece that'll actually go in the kitchen. And I can pull the hinges off the prototype. And then cut down another sheet of plywood. So this sheet will be the drawer faces along the north side and the corner door. So this plywood has a very strong horizontal grain, and it's fairly even. But what I found is I think I do want to line up the pieces. Like, I don't want to just be haphazard about which piece goes where, because you do see a little bit of variation in the grain. I can drill the holes for the hinges. Which makes a lot of chips, but it goes pretty quickly. This type of hinge fits into that hole. And then I can attach the hinges. I found if I put the door in place and then mount the hinges in the cabinet, if I can get in to reach where the screws are, I can mount the door that way, and that works pretty well. You can see how this corner hinge works for this door. And then the last piece to do is the doors under the sink. And they're a little bit shorter because of the sink, so I didn't want to cut a whole strip out of an entire sheet. So I cut part of the end off of a sheet and used that for the door. And I sanded. I sanded the other pieces too, but I'll show it here. This plywood's really smooth to begin with, so I started with the 220 sandpaper and then went to the 320 sandpaper. I didn't have to do a whole lot of sanding to the surface. I ran the sander along the edges just to cut off the sharp edge on the corners. And I can put the hinges in for these doors, which was the same method for the other door. And I can attach these to the cabinet. Now these doors, I cut the height exact, and then I left them a little bit long. And then once I have the doors in place, I can then mark where to cut their lengths so that it's somewhat centered, but also so that the gap between the two doors is perfect. So they're a little bit long. And then I can just cut off a little strip off of each door. Now these hinges are also adjustable. So what I did is cut them to where they met in the center, and then I could adjust them apart just slightly to get a reveal. Then it was time to put the finish on. I started with just butcher block oil, but what I'm finding is when it gets wet, it actually leaves a mark, which really isn't going to work because they're going to get wet. So I've resanded and I've put on a layer of polyurethane, so it's a little more durable. Then there was just a last couple of little infill pieces that needed to go in just to kind of finish up the surface of the cabinets. So there's a little piece above the dishwasher, and then there's a little piece in the corner. I had gotten lots of comments about what to put in that corner, but by the time I'd gotten those comments, it was sort of already finished.
The fronts are done. That was a big project to get out of the way. We moved the fridge into place, which kind of made the kitchen functional. So we've sort of moved back in again, and for the most part, it's done. So there's two last little projects in here, which is the baseboard around the bottom, and then two shelves over on the wall to hold all the cups and kind of that kind of stuff. So we're getting really close.
Thanks for watching.